What do I think about that? Americans were not allowed to read because they would get the axe, like the death penalty. All Americans weren't allowed to read? I mean, Americans, it was against the law for Americans to read. It's simple. How is that even possible? Okay, well, look. Some Americans were allowed to read and others weren't. Well, why weren't the other Americans allowed to read? Because it was against the law, that's why. Well, why were some Americans allowed to read and other Americans weren't allowed to read? Well, the same reason why some Americans were allowed to vote and other Americans weren't allowed to vote. That's why. Well, why were some allowed to vote and others weren't allowed to vote? Because. Just because. Well, if they're all Americans, why would some vote and some can't vote? I mean, what's the problem? Well, you know, Americans weren't even allowed to own property. Did you know that? Let's just change the subject. Americans weren't even allowed to own property. So you're telling me right now that Americans couldn't own property? Some Americans could own property. Other Americans couldn't own property because some Americans used to even get their homes burnt down to the ground. Whole city blocks got bombed and burned down like you never believe. Well, who was burning them down? Americans. Why? So did you know, let's get off America. So did you know that like China or, Nigeria, all the countries in the world. Let's talk about the countries in the world. They're all like China, they're Chinese and Nigerians and Jamaicans, and yeah, so yeah, that's all. They're all the same. No, they're not. I read in my school books that China had like what 500 ethnicities or something. They're all Chinese, but each of them have their own thing going on. They even have their different names. Why isn't it like that in America? So, Americans are different. We have different personalities. We dress different. We eat different foods. Yeah, we're diverse. We're all Americans. But can't you be American and something else at the same time? Yeah, I mean, I guess, but it's not the thing to do. Apparently. Explain. It would seem to me that because we have indigenous people in the United States of America and indigenous people everywhere, those were the original peoples, correct? Yes. Well, they were named different names, right? We have the Cherokee, we have the Apache, we have the Seminoles, right? Right. And in other countries, we have, let's say Nigeria, we have the Igbo, we have the Hausa, Fulani. Okay. Well, see, in each one of these countries, they were the original peoples, right? The original peoples of that land. But when the trade happened, all the slave trades happened, most of the newer ethnicities are hyphenated or compound words. Because, yeah, they went through something like there's an ethnogenesis. I think that's the word, ethnogenesis. And so, because of all the trades that went on, there was this big ethnogenesis around the globe, right? So, let's say if we're back here in America. Keep going. Well, different ethnicities were formed, duh. And some of these ethnicities are hyphenated or compound words. So, let's see, if you go to, let's say, Brazil, right? Everybody's Brazilian, yeah, but then there's some Afro-Brazilian. See what I'm saying? So they have Afro in front of it because they have a different look. Well, that too, but it's more than just a different look. It's a different whole history, okay? It's a different whole culture in some places. So spit it out. All I'm saying is that the country is the nationality. So everybody in that country is that nationality. But it doesn't mean that that's your group, your actual ethnic group, your people. But everybody's American in America. Nobody said they weren't. America has different tribes like everybody else. And those quote unquote tribes are all American. You think you tough. No, I'm just African American. I know I'm tough.